Welcome, viewers, to the Marvellous Mind Podcast. Today, I'm joined by a lovely guest. Her name is Joy. Today, we're going to be talking about very deep topics, a nice flowing conversation about spirituality, soul remembrance, mysticism, and all that sort of jazz, the usual stuff that I waffle about here in this little section of the internet. So, Joy, would you like to care to offer some introductory statements about yourself? Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yeah, that is actually. So, like you said, I'm Joy, and we're going to be talking about mysticism and soul remembrances and a lot of interesting, peculiar things.
Very peculiar things, yeah.
Very
The most
peculiar.
peculiar things. Yeah. So I guess, because you describe yourself as a soul remembrance guide, as far as I can tell, and amongst other sort of like things. So I guess sort of to kick off this little conversation, should we talk about what is a soul exactly, and how does one remember their soul? Easy questions to start with.
Of course, that's
Of course.
a basic question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is a soul, right? I believe a soul is the most truest aspect of oneself that resides deep, deep within your innate awareness of being. So, yeah, and to connect to that is something that not a lot of us has ever thought of. And you don't normally hear that, oh, did you speak to your soul today? You don't hear that. Like, that's not normal. But that's why I'm here to kind of bring forth that sort of information and to bring forth that sort of connection about what a soul is and, how to connect to that aspect and just the higher divinity of it all. That's what we should all be talking about, I feel. Right, Brian?
Yeah. Yes, of course. And I think, this question of understanding, aligning to one's soul, some people may describe it as a sort of a kind of cultivation of awareness of their mind, as a kind of introspection. They're looking into the many different patterns that they have, which constitute their awareness, their consciousness, and like I suppose the soul may be conceived as something that lies deep and at the source, almost prior to all the conditions that we have from society, or the sort of training of certain ideas or the narratives, identities that people assume. The soul is perhaps something that's really at the root of it, and I suppose people can become disconnected from their souls, disconnected from that raw, authentic source of their being through many different things. Can sort of obscure it.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, like, because I suppose in society we're always sort of culturally embedded in certain roles. You have, I'm a father, or working a particular job, or a teacher. All these sort of identities. Like, how do you think the different identities that people can take on by when they're operating in society, how does that sort of like interplay with an understanding of their soul? I don't know. I could sort of elaborate what I mean, kind of more.
Yeah, of course. So I understand that. So I believe that these are two very different aspects. So the soul aspect has nothing to do with the roles that you're playing. In fact, it's more so that you have to release and deviate and detach from these roles in order to come back to your soul. Your soul is just an awareness of who you truly are at your core. So these identities more so, I would say, are a blockage to who you truly are. It's a mask. So I would say that the removal of these is the way to your soul. Like, of course, in today's time and age, we are very societally based, and we have different roles to play, of course. But I believe that when you detach yourself, even in the way you think, that, let's say, for example, I'm a doctor and my entire personality or my entire truth is all that is a doctor, and there's nothing beyond that. And that's how many of us are functioning right now. So it's more so to release that and consider this higher possibility of what more could you be besides being that doctor.
Mm.
That's a question, I think, just to get you started on your little spiritual journey here.
Yeah,
Think about that.
yeah, and I think it's interesting. You sort of you conceive soul remembrance as not as though you're discovering something new, but something that you're sort of dissolving the veils, and it's a very deep remembering. You know that we
Mhm.
often forget through becoming overly attached to the various identities and roles that we have. We become so trapped within a certain identity of being this kind of person that your entire reality becomes almost filtered around that sort of reality, that sort of model, I suppose. And
Yeah.
so I guess sort of my next sort of like question would be regarding this sort of like this process of remembering through detaching or dissolving the sort of the veils of identity. Could you like speak a bit
Mhm.
more about what that process would be like, how people may experience it, the certain maybe the good, the certain maybe uncomfortable aspects of it, because I think this sort of this
Mhm.
conversation sort of ties a little bit into the phenomena of like ego dissolution, I suppose, which can be a
Very
very
much.
um, yeah, it can be a very enlightening and illuminating experience. But as we know from psychedelic experiences, people who do those sorts of things without adequate preparation, it can be a very uncomfortable experience when they're not sort of when they don't adequately surrender and prepare for it. So I suppose, yeah, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah. So, very well tied, actually. Like you said, it involves a lot of ego dissolving, and you mentioned that it's very uncomfortable to certain people. So I believe that it's only uncomfortable from people who have been a little too, I would say, deep into society right now. And there's a lot of people that are also very fluid in that ego disorder. So I believe there's two sides of the spectrum here. And yeah, so a lot of people who do find it difficult, it's because they aren't really used to change. I believe
Mm,
that change is the first it's the first factor to kind of take you back to who you are, because who you are is ever changing, it's flux. So change is a very major factor here. So only people who are uncomfortable with change kind of sort of experience these issues of being scared of what or who or like how to get in touch with your soul. So
mm,
yeah, that's what I would say.
mm. So yeah, it's like, 'cause, I mean, change is a fundamental aspect of the universe, of existence.
Yeah.
We are these sort of flowing and constantly evolving beings, and I suppose this sort of ties into the whole notion of permanence and impermanence. People cling to a sense of permanence through their egoic identities, and when these things are revealed to, I suppose, be illusions or not as stable and permanent as they think they are, um, whether in sort of a state of meditation or a psychedelic trip, um, having that reality of the flux of existence
Yeah.
really barge you in the face. It is it is for some people who are afraid of change, who are afraid of the unknown, particularly. Um,
Mhm.
it's a very sobering experience, I suppose. So I guess sort of,
Mm.
I suppose something to tie into this question is like, because I think this is for a lot of people, they'll be able to relate to this. A lot of the notion of ego dissolution is often wrapped up in with a sense of fear, and so I guess the question I'll sort of take us into next is the question of like, how does one psychologically prepare or cultivate their comfortability with change, with the dissolving of their identities? How does one really dive into that fear component, that anxiety component, which may come associated with these higher mystical kind of states of consciousness?
I would suggest starting slow, because divinity can scare the absolute crap out of someone who hasn't experienced these mystical synchronicities. So I would really suggest starting very slow and simple, like meditation. The first thing that you need to embrace change is stillness, ironically. Um, when you find that stillness within you, there is a sort of comfort that envelops over you, that allows you to be grounded as that change happens externally and internally within yourself. You become this pole of stability, this receptive pole of basically just being this solid rock for yourself. So to have change and to be okay with change, you kind of need to have a solid sense of self. You need to have that grounding. And I believe that meditation provides that sort of peace through it all. And it's more collaborative when there is peace and change. So you have both simultaneously existing. And I believe that makes it a little bit easier to bear with or embrace, I believe.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that particularly with this sort of this question of change and stuff, um, in these sort of like higher mystical states, um, people will become acquainted with the fact that their true reality, extends beyond just their little organism situating in a certain place in space and time, and
Mm-hmm.
they come to the awareness that they are much bigger than who they maybe once thought they self were from the perspective of the
Mm-hmm.
ego. And I suppose that sort of process of transcending the ego, or transcending the egoic model of separation, of kind of, this idea of being an organism in a kind of Darwinian world where you have to survive and compete or whatever, all those ideas of, fear, anxiety, and competition. When you transcend that sort of like identity, and you come to recognize that you are rather a much larger dispersed awareness, um,
Mm-hmm.
within those sorts of states, you know, in the transition to that sort of state, the ego can sort of have the sense, they may have a little voice that, oh, am I dying? Is this death? And I suppose it is a kind of death. It's a kind of death of illusion, I suppose. But if one can truly surrender, um, to that experience as it happens, surrender to the various sensations, energetic, vibrational kind of senses throughout your body, which may feel very strange, almost alien in the moment. If one can truly sort of surrender to it, they will see almost beyond that sort of, beyond on that other side. Actually, there's a kind of a sea of tranquility, rather. But when they are sort of still, when they center their awareness within the ego, I suppose, which feels like it is dying. This is why I always said that, like, the ego is it's a lousy master, but it's a good servant, I suppose. And if they can,
Mm-hmm.
and this whole process of ego dissolution, of sort of becoming acquainted with higher mystical states of consciousness, um, it is a process of sort of bringing the ego into more of an alignment with, you know, their selves and
Mm-hmm.
all the parts of their self. And I think that, you know, this, you can, over time, as you sort of repeatedly experience sort of mystical states of consciousness, you can become more comfortable with that sort of transition. Because I know for myself, with sort of my experience of meditation and yoga and whatnot. I remember, you know, a few years ago when I would be experimenting with like yoga nidra, especially, where it's like sleep meditation, where I'd watch myself as I drift off into sleep. I'd always notice a sort of a, you know, it would always be a cascade of like ever increasing weirder sensations or more intense sensations. And there would always be a certain point where I'm like, okay, this is too weird. And then my ego was snipping, kind of. And
Yeah.
and it
Mm.
was like I've noticed how the emotion of fear would sort of arise, which would always be that sort of um, the thing that would hold me back and keep me sort of my awareness centered in here rather than being able to, you know, disperse outwards. Like I suppose sort of, you know, as a waffly little section, but it's kind of relevant. But I suppose the next
Oh,
question I'd ask would
relevant.
be, yeah, next question I'd sort of like ask was about how does the emotion of like fear tie into all these sort of questions of ego dissolution and mystical states of consciousness?
So I feel like we should shift from fear to more of how do you actually feel when you're in those states, which can also be euphoria. Because I believe I do not wish to promote fear by talking more about fear because frequency tends to do that.
Mm.
So I want to be more encouraging in this aspect and support the other spectrum, right? Which is more of how do you actually feel when the ego is gone, it's dissolved, you're in a good space now, like this is shifted, okay? How does that feel? I could tell you about that. Like that is just
Mm.
beyond anything you could ever experience in a human way. It's pure divinity. When you
Mm.
reach these higher states of being, it feels like, I mean, for me, it feels like being home. There's this innate feeling of resonance, and I believe that is more of the true human feeling that anyone would experience in these states because it's like you came from there, you belong from that higher frequency. So when you ascend back, it's always about going back. It's not that you're reaching a new place. This frequency, this higher dimension, has always been within you. We've forgotten. That's why the remembrance, right? That's my job.
Mm.
Um, so when you're here, it's not going to be like, oh, well, what is this? For some people, it can be, but for most people, it's more like, oh, wow, it feels like a womb, sort of. Like you've been there before. You know what this is. You know what that feels like. Your ego might not know, but your soul, the real you, knows. There is an
Mm.
innate sense of recognition, and there is that innate sense of resonance with that divine experience because you have that divinity within you. So it's truly very beautiful to connect to these higher aspects of self because sometimes, most of the times, I believe we're always stuck in this lower dimension and our little human selves, and we have jobs to do and places to go and a lot going on, but that detachment, even for a few minutes a day, so whatever means you want to use, like meditation or I don't know, just nature watching, bird watching, whatever it is that allows you to feel that euphoria. Euphoria itself is a very high vibration. It's the same thing. It's the
Mm.
same thing. It doesn't always have to be
Yeah.
fractals and the
Oh, I
psychedelic
think.
vision, and that's the realm.
Oh God, you're
No, maybe
frozen. You
euphoria is
still there?
also the realm. It's that frequency. of how you truly
Gosh.
feel.
Um,
Okay.
oh, oh, you're back. You're back.
Back.
Hello, can you hear me?
So yes, I
Fabulous.
can.
No
Human
worries.
issue, internet.
Human issues. Human issues. That's good. We didn't have to stop recording, so I'll probably just edit out a little bit. But I remember
That's okay.
you'll make some very good points, and about. I mean, first about how particularly when I was talking a bit about the fear element of transitioning to a mystical state of consciousness, and then you responded by paying attention to how we can choose to focus on that fear side, but then we can also choose to focus upon the bliss, the euphoric side of truly transcending the ego, and the bliss of
Mm-hmm.
say simply being in nature for a nature walk. And I think that's a very important thing to pay attention to, and it's something that I've been talking a lot about on my podcast, about how what we pay attention to is a fundamental aspect of like how we create and clarify reality, is what we bring reality to. So if we're say transitioning to a higher state of consciousness, if we're paying attention to the negative dimensions of the fear of what's going on to your body, you're going to bring that fear to the foreground of your mind, I
Yeah.
suppose. So really, a critical component of transcending fear is almost to not give it any space within your mind, is to almost shrink it to an infinitesimal point by paying attention to the bliss, the gratitude. I think
Yeah.
the gratitude component is a crucial component, really, because we feel grateful for nature, for going for a walk in the woods and all the nature and wildlife that's there. We're grateful for it, not for what it necessarily for what it gives us, but just simply for its existence. As just kind of this gratitude and grace at the just the simple isness of it. And it's and I suppose when we're able to sort of cultivate within our minds a sort of a disposition of our attention to focus upon these sorts of things, to give more reality to bliss, the euphoria, that really does shrink down all the negative energies of fear, of anxiety, I suppose. So I guess sort of
Yeah.
to as an answer to like the question I asked, like how do we transcend fear in the process of ego decision, is the dissolution. It's to shrink it by paying attention to the bliss of the egoless state, because beyond that sort of, it is always ego. It's always ego that sort of arouses that sense of separate, that sense of threat, of unsafety. It's always
Yeah.
that which arises. But yeah, I think that's a sort of an interesting thing, how our attention, we can, by understanding what we are paying attention to, we can almost construct our mind and our conscious lives in a more deliberate manner, I suppose. But yeah, are you still connected? Oh, I'm not hearing.
I
Oh, I
no
can
no.
slightly hear you.
I am much connected.
Cool.
Do you see me?
I can see you. It's lagging a little bit.
Yeah, it's probably my
I think
bad
it should be
internet.
fine for the recording.
Okay.
I think I should be fine for the recording, but I suppose where should we take this next conversation? Should we talk a bit about like going into the specifics of mystical states of consciousness? Like, because I know you're someone who is quite well acquainted
Yeah.
with the various
Yeah.
dimensions to these sort of places. And it's something that I flirted with the I suppose the doorway, I suppose, and had a little peek, but I'm not as centered within that sort of reality. But as I've come to understand, you are different to that. But so I guess sort of talk a bit about what can someone expect to see beyond ego dissolution in that sort of other state.
Yeah, so about that, these these states are accessible through a lot of different ways. Psychedelics being one of the most popular ways to access them. And there are other ways of just elevating your natural consciousness. And I could talk a lot more about this particular way because I sort of transcend through these ways. And I believe it's natural for me. So I don't really have advice on how someone can, but I can share my experience on it as I am able to kind of flow through it and cruise through it so easily. So these states, I believe, are just sort of these levels of awareness that you unlock or have unlocked within yourself. That is what truly allows you to access that particular dimension or frequency, I would say. So it all traces back to how much awareness you have found within yourself. Like how deep do you truly kind of know yourself? Like beyond the meditation, beyond the questions, beyond the self work. Like this ties up to your soul. Like there's human work that we do, which is like inner work, childhood traumas, all of those modalities. And then you hit a point that is so far back in your awareness, and that's your soul. That's where the journey of truth truly begins, I believe, when you trace that back. And then you kind of sort of are naturally attuned and aligned to these states of being because you're floating so above the human consciousness. You transcend from human consciousness to galactic consciousness, is what I would call it. So,
Mm.
yeah. Yeah.
So like so you describe it as like a series of almost ascending levels of increasing
Mhm.
clarity of, I suppose, the source, and the source being yourself and your soul. um how, I suppose this is how, I don't know if we could say that there's like a set number of levels, but what is it
Mhm.
like to ascend through those sort of levels, going from this sort of 3D world to, as you sort of slink back your awareness into what people may describe as the astral realm? What is that process of ascension like?
Mm. Um, I believe for some people, it's not even a process. It's just like a slip of consciousness. It's like waking state and dreaming state. There is no process. And for some people who do
Mm.
have a process, I believe it would feel more like your reality changing in subtle ways. It would feel like zooming out. That's the way I could put it. It feels like zooming
Mm.
out, not out of your body, but out of whatever is going on around you. And this state just, this frequency presents itself. Like you instantly it starts with a change of thought. Like you have to pay very keen attention to the kind of thoughts you're having, and then the thoughts stop. And it's like these very subtle things that take you up on that level, and you know you're there because you're breathing different. Your body starts feeling different feelings almost. That's as
Mm.
much closer that I can get to the realness of it. It's kind of truly an experience. It's very hard to pin down these kind of mystical experiences just through words because it's so subtle, but at the same time, it's so powerful that it is only through this
Mm.
lived experience that you may experience it. And everybody has a very different personal innate experience. It's more natural for some people, actually, like we kind of make it to be this process that, oh, how does it feel to, sort of get to these levels? Maybe it's just natural. Maybe that's just who you've always been. But we haven't ever tapped into these aspects of ourselves. So we wouldn't know. And if
Mm.
you want to know, I would say trial is the best way. Like that's how you would know in its truest form.
Mm.
If you're looking for that kind of truth, it's only through a lived experience. It doesn't matter how many people talk about it. You have that experience. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think as you were sort of describing and talking about it, um, something came up for me. It's sort of a memory of like a conversation that I had with a person in a sort of this group setting where this sort of topic of, consciousness, spirituality came up, and it cued me to how, different people have different sort of degrees of awareness from, say, looking inwards, and I suppose, because I remember a point during a conversation where I really connected with a person by what we were talking about. It was like a realization that, like, oh, I know, and it was almost like the way you described it. It was like a zooming out and almost like a focalizing. It's like the rest of the surroundings went slightly blurry, and then we were
Yeah.
talking, and it was I don't know, how do I describe it? It was like
See,
the
it's
world
hard.
sort of, yeah, the world sort of coalesced in that one conversation. We were talking about it, just talking about our shared experiences. I remember the person, he was almost had a kind of a fearful, slightly fearful reaction. He was like, it felt quite strange, it kind of disconnects you from the rest of reality when you have this kind of spiritual awareness of it. And I can't remember exactly what I was saying, but I was sort of, but I can just remember that moment. It was like, because anyone who has sort of explored spirituality or meditation to some kind of depth, you know, you start seeing through different veils, different illusions and stuff like that. And seeing through sort of illusions, it can disconnect you from the many illusions that people erect and live by in society, I suppose. And that can be an isolating experience. But it's interesting when you do find another person is who shares that
Yeah.
same depth as you do. You know, it you can it's very, it's very illuminating, I suppose. And yeah, I guess sort of, sorry, I'm in the podcast at the moment. Sorry, this is minor interruption, but
Human things
yeah, I know it's interesting. We're talking about this. Oh, I've lost my train of thought now. So
happen.
let's talk about different sort of degrees of awareness, I suppose. Um,
Hmm.
like how in your sort of life, I think I remember you saying that you started having um or becoming aware of your sort of psychic capacities when you were like 8 years old, I suppose.
Yeah.
What's like
Yep.
been your experience with understanding these sort of natural faculties that you have? Um, could you tell
Hmm.
us a bit about, you know, what it was like learning that about yourself and exploring that from the start until now?
Oh yeah, that's been quite a journey for me. A very pleasant one, actually, most of it. Yeah, so basically it started when I was very young. And I believe I have always sort of had a certain level of awareness, which was more than normal for my age. If we were to go by ages and psychology and human determination and things like that, as per that, like I had always this very heightened sense of awareness, and I knew that. And I knew that because I always knew I was different. So I always knew there is something very, very different about me. And not in a way that's human, like, oh, I'm just different. Not like the black sheep. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more like, oh, I feel very different from everyone around me. In like this way that I wouldn't understand the normal functionings of people, places, or things. Like I know what they are, but I would just wonder why. Like I remember when I was a kid, I would ask people like, what are these names of the days of the week? Like, what is all of this? Like the construct, like the societal creations. Because I was so aware of what the truth is, probably at that point, that I would question all the falsity because I was the living truth of the universe at a very young age. I was completely embodied, but I didn't know what that meant at all at that time. So I would question a lot, and I wouldn't find these answers anywhere. Not in the books, not in people. And I wouldn't find it anywhere. These questions, and then that set me on the journey. Exactly that. Those questions, I knew there's something more. Those questions allowed me the possibility to know more, because those were the kind of questions I didn't see anyone asking or anyone answering. And I had to find out. I had to find out. Luckily, I had this guidance, this little nudge inside of me always that would tell me which direction to go. It's intuition. It's called intuition. That's what we call
Mm.
it. But what it is a natural way of guidance from ourselves to ourselves, which does not rely on any externalities. It is our North Star. So I followed it. I followed it, and it brought me here. It brought me to um, the truth of it all, truly. We all have the same truth at the baseline, no matter what we try to say and differentiate between our experiences, it all brings us back to the same point, which is we're humans and our soul. We should do a podcast separately just about humans and the soul. I could go on for like hours. So, yeah, to sum
Well,
it
let's
up,
do that.
pretty
Yeah,
much. Yeah.
yeah. No, there's a lot of interesting threads we can sort of go on there. Particularly, say,
Yeah, of course.
um, describing how your sort of early realizations as a child of having all these different weird questions, this sort of insatiable why. Um, I certainly very strongly relate to that. I was always sort of a child who, I don't know, I relate to your sort of sense of being that hypersensitivity, that sense of insatiable curiosity for wanting to understand what is going on and not really being fully satisfied by the various answers that you may get from people, from society, and stuff like
Mhm.
that. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, it was interesting. This is a bit of a funny sort of realization I remember having, like, because you started exploring these sort of gifts you had when you were like 8 years old. I don't know, for some reason,
Yeah.
a memory popped up of when I was like
Mhm.
6 years old. I remember a thought vividly where I was sitting on the toilet and I suddenly had the weird thought that what if everyone around me is robots, kind of? So I can't see what's going on in their head, kind of.
Uh,
I don't know whether I've been
no.
watching the Truman Show or something like that, but
Hmm.
wait, what did you say? Sorry, your mic cut out slightly. Hello. this internet. But I'll continue to talk a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, the internet
Oh,
is
you're back.
just not
It's like
a job. I'm
the
back.
internet.
I'm back.
It's fine. It's fine. But you said something just as your mic was cutting out in response to my my toilet story. But yeah.
Yeah, what did I say? My human memory
Mm,
forgets.
human memory. It's failed us again.
So, yeah. So I was saying these questions, like you said, very similar mine too. That is everyone a robot around me, and are we all living in this Truman show? Like, what is going on? And I would relate
Mm,
to this. I
yeah.
find cinema to kind of answer these questions. Like one of my favorite movies as a child was fucking Divergent. Like I don't know if you
Divergent.
know the movie, but anyone who does will know
I
exactly
think
what I'm talking.
Divergent. I think I've seen that sort of like ages ago.
Theo James and
But
the actress. I don't know her name.
hmm. Wait. So
And he's
remind me a bit about
directing.
the Divergent plot line.
Yeah, I'll describe some more about it. Um, so it's this movie about this girl being very different from the rest. And there were
Hmm.
these different clans of people, and they were all the same, but something about her was different. Like everybody had the same gifts, but she would stand out, and the society would kind of like pick her up, and she was a threat to the society for being different because what she had to say and what she believed to be true was the truth, and it would unmask all these masks like placed by the officials in the movie. And then she obviously had this very romantic match as well, who was the same, the guy, Theo James. Um, yeah, so he was also divergent. So that difference that she had was called Divergent. We should watch that movie. But
You
anyway,
should. Yeah.
uh, yeah, yeah, we really should. It's kind of like a true story at this point. So that was one of my favorite movies because
Mm.
I would resonate so much to being different and how nobody gets it. But the one who is different, they find that resonant because they are different as well. So yeah, just things like that. Like yeah. So
Mm.
I believe
Yeah.
that
No.
is true.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
suppose for people listening who can kind of relate to this sense of being different, I think that the whole journey, at least for myself and maybe for a lot of people, is that realizing you're different, it can be accompanied with a sense of shame, at least in the process of it, because you're often um, socially stigmatized by other people because they can't understand you, you can't understand them, and that leads to a real sense of isolation where you almost have to retreat to yourself, um, because whether it's because the things that you're interested in, other people aren't interested in, the things that other
Yeah.
people that occupy their consciousness, the thing they talk about, it doesn't arouse the same yearning for you. Like I know for
Yeah.
myself, like yeah, it's like I don't have these sort of like deep conversations with many people really. It's mostly a sort of a journey of inquiry that I've sort of taken myself through, looking myself kind of, and that's okay. But I mean, I'll say like nowadays I'm definitely finding more people to share that interest in, and to talk about these sorts of stuff, and yeah, that's a very it makes it all the more enriching, I suppose, to spend a lot of time thinking that you're weird, but then realizing that there are other people who share your depths, but they just may be few and far between. You just have to seek them out and find them, I suppose. but when you do,
Yes.
you both can sort of discover deeper depths together with another person. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess
Yeah.
like to continue with asking you about your sort of experience with understanding your sort of psychic capabilities from a young age and till now. You described like this at the very beginning when you were young. You were always a kind of a sensitive child, and in that you could pick up and perceive things that most ordinary people wouldn't be able to perceive, or they perhaps ignore. Um, how did your sort of your general sort of sensitivity extend into what you may call more psychic sensitivities?
Mm-hmm. So I believe that, firstly, I knew there was something very, very divine that is working with me, because I would not study for my exams. I couldn't care less about what they teach. I was a natural genius, luckily, so I didn't have to worry about grades and all of that stuff. That's all. But the psychic ability part, I wouldn't study anything, and I would have these MCQ exams. And I love exams because it's a good test for me to prove myself and to prove how much I know. And that's good. But in some topics like math, I couldn't care less about math. I don't know, I
You
just
can't.
couldn't.
Why?
So,
Fair
no.
enough. Mm.
So,
I mean,
anyway, so
I
in
think
my.
like the way they. Sorry, I won't interrupt.
No, go on. I want to
I
hear
was
what you
just
have
going
to
to
say
say
about.
something about maths.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I think
I
that the
know.
way they teach. Okay, I'll make a short statement about maths. Like, I think that the way that it's often taught to, it's in a very hyper abstract way where you're doing written down equations. It really detaches you from the fundamental intuitive aspects of mathematics, I suppose, of exploring
Yes.
shape, geometries, the math that isn't written down in text in a book, but it's actually all around you in the shape of an object, actually
Right.
getting kids to really think about that will make maths more interesting, more exciting. Because a lot of people, they're conditioned to hate maths because the way it's taught is fucking shit. But sorry, I'll let you continue. I just had to
No, I
support
was saying.
maths for a little bit.
Yeah, no, I know. I see you supporting math, and that's okay. If you teach it well, I support it as well, but it's math. So I was saying, yeah, so I wouldn't really, and when I don't like something, this is a thing from me from childhood. If I don't like something, I just don't bother with it. I can't. Like, I just can't. I don't find resonance in it. I don't care. I will not care. I don't have it in me. So then, thank God for my psychic abilities, apparently. I aced it. Ask me how. Ask me how. How did I ace and I
I'm not
got.
going to ask you how.
I know. I know. That's what I'm going to tell you. That's exactly why I'm going to tell you. I literally would randomly circle my fucking MCQs with my fucking third eye psychic intuition, acing the shit out of my papers. My mother is shocked at home because she knows I hate math. She knows I'm not good at it. And she's like, how the fuck did you get this grade? Like, what did you do? What did you do? And I used to tell her. I was so aware, right? You were asking about all my aware senses. I would tell her I'm a psychic. I was that aware. I knew. I knew my path. I know who I am. That's why I'm a soul guide. I came aware. Any more questions for me?
Mm. Yes, lots of questions. So, describe this sort of experience of circling random answers in your test. Okay, how did your third eye communicate to you the right thing to circle? Did you know why you were circling that particular thing? Did you read the question at all, or were you just drawing circles on the paper?
That's even more insane. I couldn't even give two flying shits to. I'm sorry, to read the question. I couldn't even read the question. I would just be like, ooh, which circle should I pick? And then I would pick it, and I would be right, just like everything else. So, first of all, that's a logical question on like, oh, did you think anything? Intuition is not thinking. It's a different faculty of senses, psychic senses. So you do not think while that happens. It's a driving force. It just happens. And if you let it happen, it'll happen.
Mhm.
If you question, oh, when's it gonna happen? Am I right? That's doubt. And as a child, you're very naturally in tune to just being open, to trusting. Intuition, trust, same thing. Same thing. Intuition is trusting yourself. There is no difference. When you trust yourself, there is only intuition that's left for you to follow. There is no doubt. There is only doubt when you create doubt, which is like, oh, am I right? Why would you be wrong? Why would you be wrong?
Mhm. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I suppose sort of trusting intuition is a kind of is surrendering
No.
thought in that sort of moment of doing. Or is,
What I mean, trusting is you trusting yourself is your intuition. Not like, oh, I'm going to trust
yeah.
myself and the intuition. They are not separate. That's what I want to put emphasis here. So there is no confusion for everybody that's watching. Intuition is you trusting yourself. And what that material is to trust on yourself, that little thing is intuition. That's what it is.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there's a kind of immovable confidence that comes when you trust yourself, like totally and wholly. And you put your finger on how, the thought and the emotion of doubt is something that really inhibits one's intuition when it sort of arises and there's something that they're doing. They'll be doing something there. I mean, a lot of, say, anxiety, social anxiety, for example, when people are talking to a person, they become disconnected from their intuition, from trusting themselves because they're caught up within all these doubt about, oh, am I going to be liked by this person? Am I saying the right things? All those sort of stuff. And all those doubts, it inhibits flow. And I think flow is very much when you trust yourself and you thereby fall into that deep intuitive knowing, you fall into a state of flow almost like this conversation right now. I'm not thinking, I'm not doubting, oh, am I saying the right thing? I couldn't really care less about saying something stupid. This is my podcast.
Good.
I can say what I want. But
Good.
but yeah, so when you're in that flow, you're just trusting whatever comes to come, and you're just speaking truth in the moment, I suppose. Like how what you're doing when you were giving that nice little story about how you aced a maths test easily with your with your third eye. But that's a profound like trusting of your intuition, and I think that underlying like any kind of mastery of any skill or any capacity, the end goal of that is a total trust of yourself, and thereby you're able to really fall into deep states of flow where you're at one with the activity you're doing, and there's no fragmentation of your consciousness. There's no niggling kind of like it's like just raw expression.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes to everything that you said. Yes. Exactly that.
Yes, it came from my third eye.
Oh, good. I am the soul focus guide. If you want to talk to me, you can. Just saying.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you offering your expertise and mastery.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So I wanna talk about something here, which is like for the audience, like, do you see this? like this, what just happened between two human beings. Like, I, with my psychic ability, just activated this person. Like, I just activated him.
I was already activated. I was already
No,
activated.
no, he was to a basic level.
No.
I just upgraded. Okay, I just upgraded him just a little bit. You were talking about different states and levels of consciousness. We have to be honest here. We have to be honest here. So I
I was
basically lived
helping guide the
in.
audience.
No, let the audience do the talking. Comment down below. Yeah. So, anyways, I was
No.
saying basically, I created this young man just by being myself. That's the thing about humans, when you're in your own power, other people see you being in your own power, it reminds them of their own power. We share that frequency. If I am empowered, you're going to be empowered in my presence. For example, it just happened right now. Rewatch it if you don't get it. Rewatch it. It's true. So you
No. No.
basically empower
I
in your
agree.
own power. You you were saying something?
What did you say? I said
Yeah,
I
I was
agree.
saying,
That's why. Sorry, I disrupted your flow.
yeah, a little bit. Yeah, so I was
What were you saying?
saying
What were
that
you saying?
I am saying as I am speaking, that is that
You're speaking now.
I was saying, so basically,
What is it?
when
What is?
no. So basically, when you're empowered, you empower others. It is a service to humanity for you to empower yourself, for you to stand in your truth. You do not physically have to help people constantly. Maybe if you just help yourself and be that living embodiment, the entire world gets that frequency. Like, you do not physically have to go around helping every single person. You can be the living example of what that truth looks like for you. Inspiration is the biggest help to humanity right now. Could inspire people in them being themselves just by you being yourself, which is what I did to him, pretty much, right now. And to all of you, most likely.
Yeah.
We'll know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, don't take too much responsibility, okay, Joy? You know, I was already grounded within my intuition. Thank you very much. I was grounded in my
Sure.
raw expression. But okay, I'm speaking. But you
Go,
make a
go, go
very
for
good point in
it.
terms of how I'm speaking. I remember what I'm saying. You make a great point in how when you are
Right.
able to align with your truest, authentic expression, and to tap into that with that raw confidence that comes from acting from a state of authentic being rather than the fear, the doubt. When you're able to flow into that, you create a kind of a conscious space where others around you they can respond to the frequency, the energy that you're reverberating out. Some people may respond with a sense of unease because they're like, "Oh, this is someone who is really powerful and authentic," and if they're maybe
Yes.
not happy within themselves, they may respond with, judgment or some kind of social
Mhm.
shunning. Other people may react with a sense of, whoa, this is someone who feels truly just free to express who they are. And you can create a space of freedom for them to also express who they are. Kind of like how Joy kind of did by, talking about intuition and all that sort of stuff. It sort of it reminded me of, what did you say? You're cutting out again. What did you say?
Oh, I prevails. Always. Always. Frequency speaks. Frequency speaks. That's what I said.
Frequency. Aye, Captain. That's what you said. Yeah, when you interrupted me, my flow. But yeah, I think, yeah, gosh. We're coming up to the hour mark, but we've had a wide ranging
Yeah,
conversation today, and
we could
I
go
think, like,
later.
you know, that. What's that? Sorry,
I said like we
what did
should
you
keep
say?
some more material for like later, for like more of these. Like a series. That would be kind of cool.
Oh yeah, for the what? Sorry, the CDs.
The series. Like more of
The
what we're talking
series.
about.
Oh, the series.
More on like
Well,
different
okay.
episodes.
I might. Yeah, I might re-invite you to the Marvellous Mind podcast. Maybe.
I would like to invite my podcast actually. I have my own podcast if y'all are
Your
interested.
podcast. What podcast? What's it called? What's
I
it
do.
called? What's your podcast? You literally
It's
copied
called
me. You copied my idea.
The Inner Works. That's what it's called.
The Inner Works. Oh,
Yes.
the Inner
Works
Works.
of your mind. I'm going to talk all about it. And you'll be invited soon. Soon.
Good.
I'll let yeah.
Soon. Okay. You better. And then, okay. Well, I think
Of course you're
we
invited.
will.
I like you enough to invite you.
Oh, that melts. That melts my heart, Joy. It really does. Makes me feel very, very blessed, intensely blessed. But I think we should, you know, have some ending, concluding kind of comments for the listener. She's laughing at me again. But I suppose, yeah, viewers, if you enjoyed this, you know, like and subscribe and do that kind of thing. Miss Joy, would you like to share where people can find you on the internet? Are you still
Well,
there, Miss Joy? Oh, she is.
to find. Well, I'm going to be doing my own podcast soon, so you'll find me on YouTube. But if you're still curious, I have Instagram. I'm doing this tiny series on Instagram. So yeah, probably Instagram. Yeah. And basically, if you're allowed to, you'll find me. It'll be like fate. You know, I'm like an omen when I come into people's life. So if you found me, you found me. And if you didn't find me, you didn't find me. I'm going to leave it there.
Wow, what a profound way to conclude the podcast. A nice little omen. Well, viewers and listeners, you know, you have found joy, so let that be a catalyst for change in your life. But more importantly, you found me, and I'm more important, obviously. But anyways,
Sure.
goodbye, people. Say goodbye to the audience, Joy. Wave goodbye. All right. There we go.